Good evening. I'm Milton Curry, Dean of the School of Architecture at USC and the Della and Harry McDonald Dean's Chair in Architecture. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the USC Architecture Spring Public Event Series. And this evening, we're fortunate to have the curators and architects and designers in the Museum of Modern Art New York exhibition, Reconstructions, Architecture and Blackness in America. Joining me in conversation for about 25 to 30 minutes prior to speaking with members of the Black Reconstruction Collective are Sean Anderson, Associate Curator of Architecture at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and Mabel Wilson, the Rupp Professor of Architecture at Columbia University, Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation. This past year, these past several years, and these past 24 hours have been emotional for many reasons and for many people in this country and across the world. And this exhibition and the effort that's gone into it and the initiative to bring it into being is truly amazing. And it's something that I think speaks to the extraordinary talent and the extraordinary ingenuity of all the people that you'll be hearing from this evening. I'm personally gratified to see so many friends and colleagues across the country who I respect greatly and whose work deserves the credit and the visibility that it's getting through this show. You should all see the show. You'll see many images of it, but there's nothing like seeing it in person. So hopefully this will inspire you to do so. I want to now ask Sean and Mabel to join me on the screen and begin conversation that will give us a little bit of a framing opportunity to speak about, for them to speak about the genesis of the exhibition, the topics that are covered, that will lead right into our students giving a presentation, and then members of the Black Reconstruction Collective moving through images and discourse around the exhibition. So Sean and Mabel, welcome to USC Architecture. We wish this could be in person, and I know that going forward, both you and the Black Reconstruction Collective will have opportunities to engage with us here in Los Angeles with our students, so we look forward to that, but welcome.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So we just got about 25 minutes or so to chat, and I want to start by, again, extending congratulations for bringing the show into being at such a timely exhibition. I had the pleasure with your invitation to be on the advisory board, and it's some of the most, interesting dialogue and collegial dialogue that I've been a part of, and so I'm very pleased to have been a part of that. I want to start by asking you kind of how the show came about. What was the genesis of the idea of the exhibition with Black architects, designers, particularly focused on this theme of Reconstruction?
Well, I'll start, although Mabel, please jump in when you wish. So thanks again, Milton, and everyone for inviting us here today. The genesis of our exhibition came, for me personally, out of research that I had been doing in the museum almost upon my arrival about notions of absence, absence in archives, absence in collections, absence in exhibition histories. And the more I began to think about and in a way meditate on these absences within the Museum of Modern Art's own exhibition histories and collections, what is striking, or what was striking to me, and perhaps still is, was the dearth at the time, this is now several years ago, more than 3 years ago, the dearth of African-American artists, let alone architects and designers in our exhibition histories. And the more I began to ask questions of this absence, I was immediately introduced to Darby English, who was a visiting curator at the museum at the time. And it was Darby, in fact, who put me in touch with Mabel, who, and they were working on a volume entitled, among others, Blackness at MoMA. And I think that was the meeting of of many worlds all at once. It was an extraordinary moment to sit down with Mabel and learn that she too was looking at these absences in the museum collections. And it was from there that we began a discussion about not only how to make an exhibition like this, where to begin an exhibition like this, but also with whom can we make an exhibition like this? And it began almost a 3-year-long set of conversations that we are still having today, and we're still so fortunate to be with the BRC today because of this, and of course the advisory committee of which you mentioned, Milton. Mabel, do you want to pick that story up?
Sure. I'll just tell a little bit also about how I came to the project and also what interests me. And it's true, at the time I was working on an essay for Darby's volume, one he was doing with Charlotte Barat, which looked at why there were no, or at least they couldn't find anything that from anyone who identified as Black in the architecture and design collection. And so I ended up writing a piece called White by Design that sort of talks about that condition, and also, the connection between whiteness and architecture. And so when I met with Sean, there was this sense of and an interest in this question and that absence. And for me, and I think like many folks who contributed to the show, having a multidisciplinary practice meant that, yes, why not do curatorial? I mean, I'm not a curator. I'm a historian and a designer. And I thought, well, this is a project, and why not explore these through a different kind of medium and platform? And so with these conversations with Sean and Ariel, we realized like we were going to have to put together something for which there was no map. There was nothing in the archive, right? And that's partially how the advisory group, which was really, I call it our human archive in a way, our sounding board, our brain trust, helped us conceptualize, exactly what were the stakes of the project, the kind of aesthetic dimensions, and also the kinds of people we were looking for to contribute, I think, to it.
Thanks. And I want to pick up on a couple of threads. When did you start planning the show? 2018, 17?
I think officially, because there was a bit of research that we both were doing ahead of time, and then the process of actually formally proposing the exhibition. Yeah. So then that would have been at the end of 2017 and then the beginning of 2018.
Yeah, we started our conversation, I looked on my calendar, February of 2017 was when we first met.
Yeah. So timing-wise, it feels more prescient today than it might have, although I think we're in times, just the last 20 years that a show like this would have been perfect and is long overdue. But given the circumstances of the last several years and the conditions under which the architects and designers were working on this work, there must also be satisfaction, might not be the right word, but there must also be a sense that the impetus for the show, as I understand it, part of which is that the status quo is unacceptable. Sean, you talked about the absences. Mabel, you talked about the things you pointed out in your essay around whiteness in the field and the lack of Black thinking, visibility around Black architects. The status quo is not acceptable. That's something that I think is an impetus behind the show. How do you think that's gained momentum? In other words, the time that we're in is caught up in a way with certain provocations in the show itself. Mm-hmm. And how do you think the show is provocating another step forward in terms of thinking about the future of the field and the discipline vis-a-vis Black architecture, Blackness in architecture, space, all the issues that are the topics of the show.
I mean, I would say, you know, the two figures that were incredibly powerful in the last 20, 15 years. One, the election of Barack Obama and him and the family coming into the White House, right? I mean, that's symbolic for Black America, but I also think the death of Trayvon Martin, right, during the Obama administration. And so, you know, this moment in which we're post-racial, and yet the same violence perpetrated from slavery onwards seems to still be happening within our built environment, and that the economic gap grows, but also the segregation of America has not really changed. And so, you know, of course, in 2017, I mean, this is the beginning of 45's administration, you know, and we could see the white supremacy just bubbling up to the surface. And how do you think, you know, what's the best way to think through those issues and begin to really respond forcefully? And I would say, again, at the tail end, as we were working on the show, the pandemic shows the stakes of the inequities within that environment, and also, you know, the murder of George Floyd within that. And so, you know, the question comes up, well, then what are spaces of refuge and imagination and resistance and refusal and joy and play? And, you know, how do you make a life and survive under these conditions, you know, which keep recalibrating to next regimes of political control and economic advancement?
But I would say as well that not only for an exhibition, but as you began this conversation, Milton, to go against or to even erase the status quo requires new thinking. It requires thinking about not only the systems and structures that undergird institutions, but also pedagogies and the very nature of who is visible, who is not visible. And what we've seen even before Obama's election is that this hypervisibility and then this erasure that's happening, not only of bodies and of communities, is happening all over. It's not just an American condition, although I would say it's perhaps hyperbolic in the US condition. But when you start to think about what is the status quo in America, you realize that the status quo is white. And if you look at the ways in which whiteness, excuse me, if you look at the ways in which whiteness has instigated the erasure or the disenfranchisement of communities of color over history, then what you're looking at then, and what I was thinking about, and I think all of us in the advisory committee were actually talking about, was then where do you begin? And I think for us was to begin with the ground and to think about the marking of the ground, either through through maps or through the very nature of who defines that ground, who owns that ground, and who gives value to that ground. And I think over time, what we started to recognize and see was that the space of the exhibition became that new ground for us to perhaps instigate a new understanding of architecture and space.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think to both your points, and Mabel, to your point about maybe the promise or the naivete of the term or thinking around post-raciality, in a way, there's a way in which that mimics, in a way, Reconstruction itself, which was this kind of the promise of realizing certain kinds of ideals that were then snatched away through different mechanisms, some by the state itself, the kind of taking away of rights or not giving rights that were kind of bestowed kind of constitutionally. And that seems to be, that can also be a useful frame to kind of think about the way in which I think your exhibition and the participants are probing this question. So some are probing it from more of a conceptual framework, some more from theoretical framework, and some more from a practice framework, meaning kind of, professional practice. And I know in discussions in the advisory board, Mabel, I know that you brought up the fact that Black people in this country at points, obviously, were not able to become architects because of the restrictions around, what making a building required and who could do it, who was allowed to be in that mode. And then thinking about today, where Black architects are just 2.53% of all the licensed architects in the US. How do you think the show, the thinking, the momentum around Blackness in architecture, race in architecture, can break the cycle in a way and produce a more sustainable activity that would actually change the foundations of the discipline?
Easy question, Milton.
You gotta earn your keep.
For that, I really need a martini right here. I think it's hard. Like, I don't think one thing's going to do it, because I think, it's like everything. Like, race isn't one thing. It's not a feeling or an attitude. It's systemic. It's in everything. It's like capitalism. So I don't think it's just one thing. I think it's getting people to recognize across, multiple leverage points, to understand what has to change. And I don't think that solely has to be the work of Black and brown folks and people of color. It can't be, because we've been doing it, screaming at the top of our lungs, for 400 years. Like, it's not our work. I think it's the work of our white colleagues, to really recognize and take on the work to really dismantle these discriminatory frameworks. I'm teaching tomorrow my seminar, a really great essay by Lisa Udan on Noah Purifoy, who would have been a kick-ass designer, except he was continually discriminated against in every job he got in the design industry. And he's just said, excuse the language, fuck it. And I'm going and I'm becoming an artist. And he allied with amazing artists and produced amazing work. But he couldn't make it in the 50s and 60s in the design world.
Mm-hmm. I just add that if we look at art production and the ways in which, I've read recently it's being called a Black Renaissance, the ways in which Black artists are being now seen and rightly so, obviously, but placing these individuals front and center within cultural institutions and public spaces. But what is intriguing to me is that Black architects aren't being put front and center in cultural institutions. I mean, yes, there are a few that we hear about or we see on occasion, but not in a way, not in a concerted effort, I would say. And I completely agree with Mabel in the sense that when we are dealing with systems and we're dealing with deeply embedded systems, we have to recognize, we have to undo the very nature of how those systems persist. How do they continue? And I think it begins at an early age, and it begins maybe even in high school, and trying to generate ways in which young students who may be interested in a field that has long been almost a bastion of privilege can feel open to them and can feel accessible to them and be part of the vocabulary of transforming a city, right? A space, a house, a condition.
Thanks. Is there, just speaking a little bit now about the museum and the situation that that the show finds itself in within a major blue chip institution that traffics in contemporary art and modern art with a historic commitment to the exhibition of architecture and design. What is the role of cultural arts institutions in creating more space for these kinds of shows, for the visibility of Black architects? I mean, I was heartened, I probably wouldn't have done the deal. I was heartened by the Getty Research Institute and their openness in the discussions when our school and the Getty jointly decided to acquire the Paul Williams archives. What they said to me was the Getty Research Institute Black Arts Initiative could not be complete without the work of Black architects. And I thought that was, for an institution, very forward thinking. I wish more institutions thought about Black art and architects more in synergy with one another than separated. I don't know if you both feel that way. Obviously, the art world is very different from the architecture world, but I think that that would be a productive, ongoing, inclusive conversation.
Absolutely. But Milton, I don't think the two worlds need to be so separate. And I think what our exhibition really does start to say is that the ways in which we experience and the ways in which we see architecture or spatial conditions or even each other can be regarded through an artistic lens as well as an architectural lens. And I've always felt in previous exhibitions that I've done, I always include the works of, say, artists who think about space or who think about architecture and vice versa. And it's just, we have to, I think from an institutional perspective, we have to take off our blinders and recognize that these are the ways in which we interact, see each other as cultural producers and sites of cultural exchange, that they shouldn't be separated. And the notion that a museum or a cultural institution should replicate the very same divisions that have been going on for centuries is a little absurd, right? In this day and age.
I mean, yeah, I think it's great, and congratulations on getting the Paul Williams archives extant so that people can actually examine them. Williams and Hilliard Robinson were the first Black architects to show at MoMA, followed by 40, 50 years later by Max Bond. So that's how long it takes. But I do think, you have to have creative vision in institutions to be able to do that. And I think that one of the things that the show does really well, and I think that Amanda Williams' project and Walter Hood's project shows, the history of Black creativity and invention, right? Because both those works reference patents and what could have been possible, right, if that creativity had been nurtured, right? And having someone like a David Hart in the show working on Watts, adjacent to Yolanda, Daniel working right on LA Broadly, I mean, just expands that definition of architecture. And I think we have to see the definition of architecture more capaciously. And as architects, we're good at delineating and defining. That's what we do, But I also think that with the show, all of the works of the show, they challenge the conventions and they really stretch the possibilities of how one would use the term architecture. And I think, I really think that's a remarkable contribution to the field and to across many different disciplines. Thank you.
We could go on and on. We're going to conclude this portion, but I want to thank you both. It's extraordinarily curated show as well. And Mabel, it's not that hard. Curating is not that hard. Don't let Sean pull you. Just kidding.
All I do is write email. It's fine.
Yeah,
But I know how.
Welcome to being Black, Sean.
But I think we should all tip our hats to, because I do appreciate getting a glimpse into how difficult it is to curate a show as wonderfully as you did, and also how to keep all the talent that you had in line, which you did as well. It's a very beautiful show, but also a very tough show in terms of the topics and all that stuff. So you struck a great balance. So thank you. I'm now going to turn it over to, I believe, one of our students who will kind of take it from here. Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Before we begin part 2 of the lecture series, we'll go ahead and play a video for an intermission. Thank you.
I think part of it is accepting that it's so much beauty in being Black. And that's the thing that I guess I get emotional about, because I've always known that. I've always been proud to be Black. Never wanted to be nothing else. Loved everything about it. Just, it's such beauty in Black people. And it really saddens me when we're not allowed to express that pride in being Black. And that if you do, then it's considered anti-white. No, you just pro-Black, and that's okay. The two don't go together. Because you celebrate Black culture does not mean that you don't like white culture or that you're putting it down. It's just taking pride in it. But what's irritating is when somebody says, you know, they're racist. That's reverse racism. Or they have a Black History Month, but we don't have a White History Month. Well, all we've ever been taught is white history. So why are you mad at that? Why does that make you angry? That is to suppress me and to make me not be proud.
My name is Shayla Johnson, and I wasn't always the person I am today. Moving from Louisiana to Sacramento, California, my parents sacrificed a lot for me and my siblings to give us the opportunities they weren't afforded. They had great intentions, but moving away from their families left us isolated and without a close familial community. My parents prepared me and my siblings as best they could to achieve great things as young Black members of society. As a kid, my interest manifested primarily in the arts. I played music, practiced drawing, and made models of roller coasters. Moving houses when I was younger left me looking to fit in with every new school. High school became the longest amount of time I spent in one school with the same group of people. I was the only Black girl within my class, and because of that, I didn't feel as comfortable being myself. Getting into USC and moving to Los Angeles allowed me to branch out and become more of my authentic self. USC School of Architecture has been a space for me to dive deep into design and pursue my creative interest. I have let my creativity shine here. I have met many wonderful individuals here, and I have been to many great places. I am Black Awe.
Who am I? Who I am? Bettina Roberta Amani Brown. First generation Liberian American. I am Black Awe. I matter. I love being Black. I stand out on my own. I am my grandmother's child. I make my own space. She, Roberta Nina Brown Cooper. Who you see, who I see, we are not the same. I have always been here. No one can ever take that away from me. I make my own room. You make your own room. From the naked eye, it's like I'm a fly in milk. But to me, I am me. Bettina Roberta Amani Brown. Where's your voice? Who are you? I found my voice. I am here. I am Black Awe.
the merchant ships. Minutes after they took I from the bottomless pit, but my hand was made strong by the hand of the Almighty. We forward in this generation triumphantly. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever have, redemption songs, redemption songs.
My name is Jamil Marsden, and I embody Black Awe. I embody the awe of my African ancestry. I personify the redemption of their stolen brilliance, stifled latent potential, uncredited achievements, and histories. I embody the grandest dreams of my ancestors, and I carry this trait with me as I forward in this generation.
My name is Ashley Odera Onyudor, and I am Black Awe. Growing up as a first-generation Nigerian in Austin, Texas, I was taught I needed to make my own space in this world because no one else would do it for me. I watched as my family and friends and beyond carried that same sentiment through their lives, and it gave me first-hand experience of Black excellence and the beauty and power in the Black body. I internalized that presence, and I started to create my own space and my own name primarily through the arts and social awareness, through playing music and activism and developing my own personal presence and success. My community and my environment helped shape my presence and curated my love for architecture. As my work became an extension of me and the beauty in being, I also let myself slip into the realm of art and let my Black awe be realized. I'm so many things. I am a conglomeration of my environment, and I'm constantly finding different pieces of myself and placing them together, just as everyone has their own different experiences. I am an artist, I'm art, I am an activist, I am a student, and I am Black awe.
Afam bụ Chizoba Ibianusi. Izu mmadụ ịbụọ ka nke ofu onye. Knowledge is never complete. Two heads are better than one.
I had to tell my story because they'd rather show you black kids with flies on their faces on the television.
Oge adịghị eche mmadụ. Time and tide waits for no one. Amodum na Nigeria, which means I was not born in Nigeria. Ma Nigeria no namoa. Nigeria was born in me. Giri giri bu ugweze. Unity is strength.
When I was in school, being African was a diss. Sounds like you need help saying my surname, miss. Try to communicate, but every day is like another episode of Everybody Hates Chris. Ever since mum said, son, you are a king, I feel like Floyd when I'm stepping into the ring. Just spoke to the boy, said he's flying in with a ting. We're touching the road to celebrate another win. We're going in.
I can't explain.
Are you feeling good tonight? Sting got me thanking God for life. I just can't explain. I can't explain, no, no.
Yeah, look, it's gonna be a long, long time before we stop.
So thank you for that. And now after our intermission, we'll go into presenting our lovely Black Reconstructive Collective, who is here with us today. We have the honor of being amongst you guys and having this fireside chat with you and having a conversation. So to start us off, we have Emmanuel Admasu, Jermaine Barnes, Siku Cook, Jay Yolande Daniels, and Felicia Davis.
We also have Mario Gooden, Walter Hood, Olalekan Jayufis, Mitch McEwen, and Amanda Williams. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us and for blowing us away with those videos.
Yeah, those videos were killer.
Yeah, that was amazing. Wow.
It was a bit of a process, but we got it together, so.
Bravo.
Do we have to show a video now?
Yeah, it sounds like us. That sounds just like us.
Let's see. It should start soon. There it is.
A nation constituted in conflict with its own ideals would need to be reconstructed before it could be fully constructed. It would need to go to war with itself and win, then reconstruct itself differently. This is not rebuilding, but reconstructing to the core of governance, citizenship, history, infrastructure, and the distribution of land. Paradoxically, the people who did the constructing and must now do the reconstructing are likely to be the same. Laborers in one instance and authors in another. Designers of this nation and of themselves.
And of themselves. The Black Reconstruction Collective commits itself to continuing this work of reconstruction in Black America and these United States. We take up the question of what architecture can be, not a tool for imperialism and subjugation, not a means for aggrandizing the self, but a vehicle for liberation and joy. The discipline of architecture has consistently and deliberately avoided participation in this endeavor, operating in complicity with repressive aspects of the current system. That ends now. We commit ourselves to annihilating the willful blinders that have enabled architecture to continue to profess its Eurocentrism as a virtue and claim apolitical ends. We reject the boundaries established by nation states.
We reject the boundaries established by nation states, challenge the spatial manifestations of anti-Black racism, and encourage creative agency and liberatory practices. This collective portal unites activists, scholars, architects, artists, and organizers across time and space. With this commitment to Black freedom and futurity, we dedicate ourselves to doing the work of designing another world that is possible here, where we are, with and for us.
That was a great video, you guys. I know it was a little hard to follow up, but still a great conversation. And I think it raised a lot of good points, both for conversing and for questions. And so I just want to start us off here. I want to ask you all, awe is defined as the combination of opposites, fear and wonder. So regarding an awe of Blackness, does an awe of Black surfaces and spaces resonate at all in your approach to your work?
Tough one to get started with.
Yep.
It's a lot. Yeah, I mean, I love that juxtaposition of fear and respect, delight, wonder, right? So because, you know, as Black bodies on this hemisphere, we've always been feared, right? The thing to really be afraid of just because of, you know, the color of our skin or I guess the size of the people who they brought over to work on the fields and to build all of the spaces that we created here. And, you know, of course, that fear is the underlying criteria of all of the policing and the brutality and the senseless killing that we continue to see. The fear that we're going to somehow take something that is believed to be theirs or believed to be owned, when the truth is we can't really own property or space or land. So the awe to me is always all encompassing of that fear, but then moving into the wonder is where I think we're all aspiring to get to in our work. Awe is something that I'm always conscious of when creating work, but it's definitely something that I aspire to. I aspire to create spaces that provoke visceral responses that people respond to within their physical being and their emotional being. So hopefully I've been able to achieve that in some places. And if I haven't yet, then I'll continue to do what I do until I get somewhere close.
This is Walter. Just sort of, I was
But
impressed.
I guess I would also counter say, okay.
Amanda's got to counter me. Hold on, Walter.
Okay, go ahead, counter. Who's speaking?
Walter.
No, I was just going to say that, you know, this
Well,
idea of,
have to say, but I
who's speaking?
would counter a little bit and say, I think. All right, I'll go. So I'm going to go fast though. I just want to counter and say, I think that I'm so blown away by the student presentations because each one was very biographical. And so the awe to me then is a state of being. And so Sekou, I would argue that there's not an aim for the wonder, that in fact, the fear is our wonderfulness. So yes, the fear has been told to us that it's constructed of these kind of components that are recognizable. But in fact, the fear for me is the wonder. And so the duality of that is Du Bois, the duality of that is code switching, the duality of that, you know, so one of the lines in my piece is, you know, because being Black is always being in two places at the same time. And I stole it from an article that was talking about Serena Williams when the first time she played Naomi Osaka and how, you know, the reading of it was that she was throwing a temper tantrum, but in fact, she's consoling the victor, right? So there's a two-ness that's always happening. There's a kind of role that we always have to play, or those of you whose parents told you had to be twice as good, like all of that to me is enwrapped in an idea about fear and wonder being simultaneous. And so it drives almost all of the work that I do, from growing up and having to live in one space and go to school in a second space. I'm a Libra. I don't know why the duality is there, but the two-ness is there for me all the time in the way that I'm framing the work that I make. And you're always going to be able to read at least two kind of perspectives. Literally, I was the multi-point perspective queen in college. But the idea of like always reading more than one thing at the same time and then developing an acuity for that ability. So I don't know if it's one progressing to the other. I don't know if you were saying that explicitly, but for me, the fear and the wonder are actually the same thing. So I'm gonna be quiet because I want to hear what Walter has to say.
Oh, now you want to hear what I have to say. No, thanks, Amanda. No, I was just reminded of this is for the students. There's a short 90-minute documentary on James Baldwin. He goes to San Francisco in 1964, and he's standing in the Tenderloin, the Western Addition, and the guy he's talking to, they're looking at a Black couple across the street in front of a church, and another couple of brothers there. And the guy asks them, says, "What do you see?" And Baldwin says something like, "I see these beautiful people." And the couple are dancing for some reason, and the other guys are like dressed to the nines. And Baldwin makes this statement that The reason why we're amazing, we're beautiful, is because we know our past, we know our history, we're told the truth, and we don't have time to sit around and create these fantasies. And I always think about that, you know, we have to go to work. You know, as Amanda was saying, you know, I'm always thinking, even at the age of in my 60s, when I drive down the street, I'm still afraid of that cop. I'm still dealing with all of that stuff. Even though I'm a tenured professor at Berkeley, I still get turned away. So you're still dealing with that, but it's not stopping us. It's actually feeding us. And that's what makes us, I think, amazing people. And we have to literally hold on to that and not be afraid to actually excel with that in us. So that's how I would add to it.
Yeah, and maybe, I mean, to add to that.
Oh, go ahead, Emmanuel.
I was just gonna say, you know, quite simply, just the fact that we're here on the Zoom, having a coherent conversation after the week we've had as Black and brown people in this country is Black awe, you know? And this is kind of consistently what we have to do. So I think that's always going to be part of the work.
I think my contribution might take us in a little bit of different direction, but looking up the word Black awe in the OED, it talks about its original use was fear, terror, and dread. And that original use comes out of Scandinavia. So I think it's really interesting that here we're pairing it with Blackness. But that word changed over time and became connected with this idea of wonder and kind of delight, and even kind of this idea of pleasure. So I think there's a lot to mind there in terms of understanding when did that happen, why did it happen, and what does it mean in terms of Blackness. So I don't know, I think your question's really interesting. I think it takes us in a little bit different direction, but I just wanted to put that out there to percolate on.
Thank you, everyone. Those were amazing responses. I want to lead into a second question for you all. Can the reimagining of architectural motifs from classical African periods, i.e. ancient Benin or ancient Kemet, be inserted into the discourse of what frames Black or African architecture in this century? And can the African diaspora, can an African diasporic renaissance be ignited in this era in a similar fashion as it did for medieval renaissance of Greco-Roman society, the effect that had for Europe? I hope I made that clear in the last part.
Can you roll that by again?
Sure.
One more time.
It's a two-part question. Can the reimagining of architectural motifs from classical African periods, ancient Egypt or ancient Kemet and ancient Benin, be inserted into the discourse of what frames an African architecture? And can an African diasporic renaissance be ignited in this era in a similar fashion as the medieval Renaissance did for European society from Greco-Roman history?
I would say absolutely. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I always have issues, technical issues. No, I to sort of collapse both questions, we have, for instance, watching the videos, right? And as Amanda said, they were very biographical. And, you know, I'm Nigerian, but I'm also American. My mom is from DC, but I was born in Nigeria. You know what I mean? So like, you know, I tap into my particular sort of, you know, culture, like my cultural experience, the way I sort of acknowledge and investigate my own particular identity. And I think this exhibit, you know, is a great example of that. Though there, you know, was not, though it was focused very much in terms of looking at kind of American cities, right? But the way we each sort of approached our examination of the city sort of sets a kind of precedent for allowing, you know, interest and identity in the way we consider all of these things to manifest. And so I think, you know, this is reconstructions and it focuses very much kind of within an American context, but it is now beginning to sort of bridge towards the broader diasporic aspect, right? And we can bring all of that into our investigations. I know in kind of forming and thinking of the BRC, a lot of us had discussed our experiences as students in the undergrad, right? And kind of the things that we found important to us around our identities and the way of sort of pursuing our particular projects, you know, kind of being ignored within the sort of Western context, and, you know, jurors and critics looking to sort of understand what we bring to our particular projects from a very, you know, sort of Western Eurocentric standpoint, right? You know, now it's really so much more about articulating our particular interest. And I say all of that to say this. I'm kind of meandering all over the place, but all of it, if your interest is, you know, Benin culture or South African or, you know, Khmer, whatever it may be, we are really trying to not say that this is valid, like not justify it anymore. We really trying to come here and say, this is what we're doing. You know what I mean? This is important. That's it. So I think that encapsulates the entire question, you know? Part of you know, this exhibit and the legibility or illegibility of it and the kind of criticisms we've received in terms of the reviews we received have really spoken to that, right? In some instances, the work has not been understood within the particular context. Jermaine brings it up all the time, right? I'm doing this so the people from, you know, so my mom, so from those folks from West Side Chicago, South Side Chicago, you know what I mean, can walk into this show and see and see in the moment and believe that it deserves to be there.
But late.
So all of it is valid. You know what I mean? This is the Renaissance. And so whether we are reaching back, you know, into, you know, a sort of deeper history, or whether we're looking at, you know what I mean, West Side Chicago, South Side Chicago, LA, you know what I mean, Kinloch, wherever, all of these histories are very valid. And like, this is literally the Renaissance, you know? So absolutely. And I say that in kind of a broad, encompassing way to acknowledge the sort of, and I believe this was Mabel's term, the capaciousness of Blackness, right? In that it reaches everywhere, right? So we're not considering a kind of Black aesthetic in terms of like looking at throwing kente cloth on buildings only. You know what I mean? Like, we're really talking about all of it. You know what I mean? It's wherever you're coming from, wherever you're seeing Blackness, right? As I said, my mom is from DC, but I was born in Nigeria. You know, my name is Olalekan. You know, so like, I meander and navigate between, this very broad experience. And that's the approach I take to my work. I have been asked, you were born in Nigeria, you left when you were 6, you hadn't been back in 20 years. Why is your first sci-fi project in Lagos? You know what I mean? And why is that your particular interest? What connection do you have, right? But I'm fascinated with this space as a sort of mega city. Conversely, you've been in Brooklyn for 20 years. How come your first project isn't about Brooklyn? You know what I mean? So they're like, ways that folks are trying to define what Blackness is, or how you express it, or how that access manifests, right? But it is literally all fair game. That's what it's about. It's all fair game, like we are setting the sort of precedent for examining Blackness, however it manifests, the diaspora, whether it's so specifically within, particular US context, or it expands beyond that. This really is a renaissance.
Jamil, and then probably just to answer the first half of your question about sort of the West African derivatives into the work that might happen and find its way into the States. A lot of the work that you find in the exhibition deals with that both informally and formally. So one of the formal ways is the griot, right? The griot is something that comes from West Africa. It is the keeper of stories. It is the storyteller. Almost every single piece of work in the show tells the story of Blackness from a different perspective, right? And so it's not a literal person, it's architecture as griot, right? So that's one way that we're taking sort of the ancestral knowledge and embedding it into our work. Another way, sort of architecturally, and I'll use Sekou's work as an example, he has a physical stoop in the exhibition, right? So if we trace the lineage of the stoop back to the TK in Hispaniola, back even further to the combat in West Africa, right? We're literally seeing that derivative, and we're seeing how it gets transported both spatially and physically. And we're seeing the remnants of that in our work from our ancestors, even though many of us may not be able to claim direct relation to our African ancestors because we may have been born in, say, a DC or in Oakland or Charlotte or Chicago.
What are you talking about, Jermaine? That stoop came from my backyard. That's from my back steps.
From the yard.
from backyard. But yeah, I mean, that makes me think of like one of the most beautiful things about the videos that the students showed is the kind of transposition of Black folks. Like we're always moving, always traveling. Like nobody was on there saying, you know what, I grew up, my parents are from LA. I grew up in LA. I stayed in LA and I go to school in LA right now. I'm not saying that there aren't people who did that, who are that, but it's just a natural part of the Black experience to know that you came from somewhere else and to respect that somewhere else and know that you're bringing that somewhere else with you into your work and into your life constantly. And I think that's just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, and sorry, just to add to that, I mean, I think to a certain extent, you guys are already doing this. I mean, the video going from Solange to Skepta, I think part of the ambition is really trying to find ways to juxtapose these fragments and how we can produce meaning from these fragments because we're always moving and engaging with new environments. I mean, one thing I would say though, the possible pitfall here is there's always a tendency to look for an origin, and that comes from a need to kind of essentialize Blackness. And I think to me, what's much more interesting is the ways in which we're engaging with contemporary conditions on the African continent, contemporary conditions in the Caribbean, contemporary conditions here in the US, and seeing how we can produce something new out of all of that. But what were you saying, Lip?
Wait, Lake talked a lot. I want I want to jump in. I want to give a shout out to Black people who stay in place. Not everybody moves around. And that doesn't matter, right? Like, I think it's the point of that has to do with being part of a diasporic condition, like a kind of larger diasporic condition, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we all are privileged to move around, and that doesn't really, that's not the main point. Yeah, I just wanted to put that in there. But I think Emmanuel's point about essentializing, that's very, very important, because with the show, there isn't an essential Black position. There isn't a singular position. There are 10 voices and 10 views, 10 life experiences. And I think that's really, really important. And that's where, if a Renaissance, is kind of visible or possible, it's because of that diversity of Blackness, actually.
Yeah, I'd like to also say, just going back to the first part of your question, Jamil, or maybe it was the second part, just to reinforce that I don't believe it's not a question of style, because that comes down to, let's say, as Emmanuel was saying, a kind of essentialization of Blackness, or even essentialization of descendants from the African continent. So as has been said, Blackness is global, as a result, of colonialism. Actually, I mean, the African people did not become Black, until the intersection with colonialism, or until the hold of the slave ship. That's where Blackness was born, at least in the global North. So, I would really advocate for, and I believe that Lake said this as well, it's not about putting some kente cloth on the building, or a certain pattern, or certain colors, but understanding the heterogeneity, if you will, of Blackness. And I think that's perhaps what troubles the man, in terms of not being able to essentialize or make it legible, or because the man thinks that the colonizer thinks that he knows the colonized, right? He thinks that he owns us. And as James Baldwin says, I'm not your Negro. So, so don't think that you know me, or that you can tell me what Black architecture or Black design is supposed to be. And I think the beauty of the show is that, yeah, we're just making the work. We're just doing it. We're not looking to codify it.
I just want to say something about how I appreciate your question, Jamil. It's really beautifully asked. I love the language of it. You ask about motifs that are inserted into a discourse. And I think really paying attention to how you ask that question also sort of can, I guess you could say, reveal some interests of your own, and also potential trajectories for how you might think about looking at African motifs. I'm thinking that the way that you've come upon these motifs have been in a book or something, or on a screen, or somehow like seen as something that might be separated. So I think in the moment that you're experiencing these, that it's important to also pay attention to the way in which this material and these things come to you, and also your own language, which is really powerful.
Hopefully I don't still have a delay. Do I have a delay?
Okay, you're better now.
You're better now.
All right, I want to echo what Felicia's saying, and also pick up on Lake talking about kente cloth on buildings. We went to school, most of us, at least 20 years ago, if not more, and we were doing exactly that, right? We were trying to find patterns in kente cloth and digging stuff out of the garbage, and I don't know, making references to our origins, or what we thought were our origin stories, what we thought people had told us were our origin stories. So for me, there's an excitement, not only in this moment for the students on this call and the students we've been engaging with over the last year, because we've done all that work and it's here and we're actually alive to talk to you about it. If you want to, if you can't find it in print, you can call us, right? And so for me, the excitement is that you're going to have to go on your own journey. So we might see some painful floor plans with kente cloth, and that is totally fine. Or if you need, you know what I mean? Like if everybody's going to need whatever they need in the moment of their evolution, be rigorous in it, but don't apologize for repeating some things we do or skipping over stuff that you don't have to do anymore because we did it already. You know, so, you know, I can't remember who just said it, right? But whatever your kind of lane or interest is, don't feel compelled to kind of mimic the way we're being educated, the way you're being educated, which is exactly probably how many of us were educated, to kind of find moments and movements and motifs and definitions. And, you know, Mabel said it in the beginning, right? That's what our discipline does. So don't trouble yourself with needing to do whatever that is. So if you need to do that to gain an understanding, or you need to jump over it because you already have a self-determination in a certain kind of way, don't apologize or second guess any of that. And for me, the excitement of the show is that we give you 10 entrees, and Yolanda just said that, right? Like there's 10 voices. There's also 10 representational styles. There's overlaps in the way we've done things. You can see that many of us were trained in certain ways and that we've deployed them in very different strategies, whether that's collage or materiality or color or form. So, you know, really mine not only this work, but all the work that's come from those moments forward, you know. So if you're interested in making those comparisons to the ways in which there are renaissances or kind of a revisiting as a way to understand now, go for it. You know, don't feel limited to think in terms of Afro-diasporic references. You know, I've resisted, and, you know, I was saying a few days ago on another call, like, you know, I got to have some therapy about why was I resisting geometry? Because I was taught that it belonged to someone else. But a circle is a circle. So why would I let somebody else tell me I reject the circle? You know, so don't worry. If you need to go to Iceland for whatever you need, then go to Iceland. You know, like the freedom is that you have all of this at your disposal. So I think it's very valid to kind of dig and reference, but it's also super okay to repeat things to get to where you need to be. And I think that's why we decided this kind of sequence of lectures to throw in this kind of remix of Vitruvius just for that reason, you know. So you can go back to the origin, or you can start with I keep forgetting our three, right? Our delight, our awe, what do we do? Awe, resilience, and something.
Joy.
Joy.
So, you know, like those are all references, right? And you can make your own three, or you cannot choose any of those three. Like the freedom is all of that. So, you know, so kind of own what you want it to be and be rigorous. I think that's the only requirement I have, is that you got to bring it. We don't have time for half steps. So whatever it is, you know, we're setting the low bar. This is the low bar, right? So go for it.
Definitely appreciate that. And just hearing like all of you guys speak on these has been super helpful, especially your take on all this. And I'm just looking at this video and looking at all like how wonderful it is that this all came together, even throughout a pandemic, even throughout like quarantine, that you still made it happen, that you still were able to get people there in person, live. And I'm just in awe myself. But I feel like one of my questions leads towards awe and skepticism. So like, although you guys are so like well-established, acclaimed, there's still that sheer fact that there's so few of us. There's so few of us that we all kind of know each other in the design community as Black people. So my question kind of has to do with like, how do you navigate that constant skepticism from your non-Black peers when you're not amongst each other? And how do you work around that as being a Black designer without having to constantly be the face of the Black designer? That makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. You're saying, when do we get to be mediocre like white people?
That's exactly the question.
I hear you. That's when you know you made it, when you get to be mediocre, right? Otherwise, you have to always be the magical Negro, like 99% of the time. And it's so much. Wait, you weren't expecting me to answer that candidly, were you?
I mean, go for it. I'm here for it.
You weren't expecting it, right? But people know I only know how to answer things candidly.
Okay, I appreciate that.
I mean, if I'm being totally fair with you, we all know it's an unfair burden that we carry, but it's something that is within our legacy within this country, to where it's an unfair burden, but those before you had to also carry it. And unfortunately, you all and your amazingly beautiful, spectacular, wonderful, amazing, remarkably well done videos are continuing legacy of carrying that magical Negro burden. And so the hope is that more shows like this happen, not biannually, and not just in MoMA, but in the Whitney or in the New Museum or in SF NOMA or in LACMA or in the Museum the Chicago Art Museum, these types of things, to where this isn't a one-off, to where us 10 aren't the only 10, to where other individuals get an opportunity, to where the canon gets expanded, to where we get to be average and we get to ascend to amazing heights as just regular average people. Because being exceptional takes a lot of energy, a lot of unnecessary energy. If I can just be average every single day and still get to the same point in my career, my life would be so much easier.
Yeah,
trust me.
I was thinking on the same lines, G, that the kind of trigger point in your question, Chizoba, was you saying that we're this so well established, and I'm thinking, like, I just got established, right? I just got here, right? Without MoMA and the pandemic, nobody knows who I am. I'm just some dude in Syracuse trying to talk about hip hop architecture that nobody, cares about. Walter's well established. He's a MacArthur genius,
But that just happened like a year ago, man. Come on.
but what I think
that's years in the making. Come on, years in the making.
But and Amanda's got three shows in MoMA at the same time. So that's but a lot of
us, I'm Jamaican.
but a lot of us are still just trying to figure it out, but to Jermaine's point, like, if I were white, I could have just kind of done all the things I've been doing and been accepted a long time ago. I would have been 10 years ahead of where I am right now, because of and I know a lot of white people aren't gonna be comfortable with that, but it's more of like, there's a familiarity that allows people to accept those who look like them into their firmament, right? And so mediocrity is pervasive in architecture, and it happens all the time. And I've just seen so many mediocre people get to places that I've wanted to be, without doing half the work that I've been able to do, right? And that's frustrating at a time, and it's not easy to navigate all the time, but it's something that we just have to grit and face, right? We're not all waiting for some magical day when this all changes. We're just recognizing that it's a long haul, and we're just working on it on the long haul, and we're all lifting as we climb. So Walter has done that for many of us here. Milton has done that for many of us here. Felicia and Yolanda have done that for many of us here. And then the rest of us are doing it for the others coming up behind us. So that's how we get to the next spot, right? That's how we get to the next place. And my sister is doing this thing on Harriet Tubman right now. And there's this great quote of Harriet talking about when she crossed the line, when she first got to freedom, she was the only one there, and she felt lonely. And this is why she got back. And of course, I'm I'm completely butchering the quotes. I'm not quoting it directly, but she had to go back, and because she felt so isolated, she had to go back for people and bring 1,000 people to freedom to be with her so that they could know what freedom was as well. And this is how we feel.
Yeah, I want to insert something in here, and I don't want it to sound too simplistic, but I think it's important for us to also find a way to flip the script, because we were talking about origin stories in the last question, and the origin of humankind is from the African continent, right? But we were taught that the African had nothing to contribute to civilization, had no culture, had no knowledge to contribute to Western civilization. So I think that, yes, we may be the only one in the room at times, but we are actually the origin. And I think that is part of the psychosis, if you will, of racism. There was a video that Amandla Stenberg put up on YouTube a few years ago, which was, what would America be like if it loved Black people as much as it loves Black culture? We've always been making culture. We are the culture, of this country, and Black people are the culture of this world. Again, I don't want it to sound too simplistic, but I think, we need to, we should, own the origin, own the origin story, and not allow ourselves to be othered, because they will continue to try to other us. And we are the origin. So I'm sorry, Felicia, I just wanted to get that out.
No, thank you for that, Mario. I want to flip the script too on that and go to something that Theaster Gates had said in a movie that is called In the Absence of Light, Black Art in the Absence of Light, where he talks about this kind of darkness or Blackness as being this kind of treasure, a place to work where you're free. You can be, the burden isn't there, that you have this kind of free play space. And so I've always really found, I have found that really inspirational in terms of thinking, the older I've got in terms of being in the profession, this has been, I think I've seen what I might have understood as a burden at the beginning flip to something that has been really liberating. So.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
I'd like
I just
to
want to, oh, go ahead, Yolanda.
Okay, well, I have maybe there are two thoughts. One is just how this work that is in the exhibit, before this exhibit, there wasn't necessarily a space for it, and within architecture, and that it's still sitting somewhat uncomfortably in architecture. It's amazing that it's here. It's really wonderful, and it's a game changer that it's here, but it is contra to the canon. And in many ways, our paths in architecture have been paths where we've had to fight to be able to voice, give voice to the views that are here. And I think it's important, while it appears as an accomplishment, the accomplishment is because it's, we had to fight to get it out. And Mabel and Sean gave us an opportunity to do this, but the discipline as a whole can actually reject this, or has rejected this historically, to such an extent that, someone like Theaster Gates ends up in art as opposed to architecture, or, like I myself, had to make a decision that I wasn't going to go into art. I was going to be in architecture, just make my home in architecture. But I literally had to make that choice. And I think in some ways, art is more embracing of things than, like, say, abstraction and certain kinds of abstraction, and involving social issues in a way that architecture hasn't been embracing. But what's really wonderful about this work is that you see 10 different views of making architecture accept, making architecture bend, and and kind of learn to inhabit this space. So that's one thought. The other thought, which is a little more difficult, has to do with the idea of the magical Negro, Black girl magic, lifting as we climb, and the idea of carrying burdens as normal. And in some ways, I've been thinking that the protests, the Black Lives Matter protests, like, part of it is about just wanting to be who you are and not having to be magical, just being accepted, on the terms that you exist on, that you don't have to do anything special, you don't have to be magical. All you have to do is exist, and you're valued because you exist, and you have worth because you exist, and you're Black. So the idea that, perhaps, like, yes, we work with these constraints and we excel with them and we're wonderful, but at the same time, we have to live through. When we talked about joy in our lecture, we talked about joy and pain. When we talk about resilience, resilience is basically springing back from trauma. That's something that Michelle Wilkinson actually, in her work on resilience, kind of enlightened me to, and I've been thinking about it ever since. And even people who are looking at, the kind of myth of the strong Black woman and how it becomes a stereotype, and that, you're not strong all the time. If you're strong all the time, you just burn out. And I think issues of health for the Black community, especially for Black women, as a result of having to both lift and climb, they're serious. And so the idea that we could maybe reach a place where, we don't have to do both, that we can be just who we are. I'd like to just, I don't know, the discussion is just making me think about that, and other discussions that are happening in other places, responses of young people, to just not wanting to carry the burden, and they don't have to. So,
yeah,
I think to kind of piggyback on that on a little bit, I think that also quotidian, which I know is a very popular word right now in Black creative speak, but I think it's a good one to kind of think through the stasis that it sounds like we're all trying to hopefully have you all find, which is about not carrying a burden, but not being lazy. And I'm just going to be real. So I don't mean lazy in the pejorative way that it's been associated with Black people and Blackness, but I'm hard on the rigor. So I think that we can have the delight, the resilience, the joy, the awe in the mundaneness. We got to have it, right? And so, coming back to Walter and I using the patents that Mabel had mentioned before, for me, that was really the kind of turning point of the work. And I can remember actually having a conversation with Milton, and I said, can't we just be every day? And he's like, no, we have to be extraordinary. And it was like a beat, he didn't miss a beat. And I was like, dang, we can't just be regular, I want some ice cream cones, Right. So, how do, but if you think about kind of what brings us the joy, it's always the extra. We got to just do a little extra. It can't just be show up. We got to show a little extra, right? So can you embrace that, but in a way that's about the quotidian or the everyday or the regularness or the Derek, Adams floaties or the what, so we see a proliferation of it in terms of the types of representation that Black creatives are making right now. And I think, to me, it's sounding like we're all starting to talk about a hope that you all won't feel like you have to brag about being twice as good, right? Like you just are, and then you delight in whatever it is you want to be good at. Who cares if it's twice as, right? Like that's the given, but somewhere, where's the quotidian or the mundane or the everyday so that I cannot accept the mediocrity. So I'm not there yet. Maybe we want to embrace that eventually, but you know, like, how do you leverage that? And as we're looking at Lake's work, there's something in this that's doing that, right? It's just like kind of showing you something every day, but it's not like you really want to be there because you have no idea what is going on there, right? But it's not giving you something like unfamiliar. It's just giving it in this way that's so seductive, the sublime, as Mabel had said earlier. So I think,
and I want to add to that, both the quick, you know, the work twice as hard has always bothered me. I'm gonna be real with you.
Thank you.
I haven't believed it. I haven't believed it, and I haven't seen it. And so for me, I feel like that's almost like a myth that we had told ourselves, or at least that it's specific to a particular point in time, right? Because like I said, I haven't seen it. So for me, it is not this work twice as hard. It is accept that what we're doing is valid. And that for me has become the thing that's important. I'm not gonna work twice as hard as my white contemporaries. I'm not doing that.
But
what I'm
do.
trying to do is to say that the work that I am doing, and however long I work at it, is justifiably solid work, right? Because for me, that has been, so, you know, I mean, I don't want to go through history, and obviously if you're, you know, there was a point in time where it did really operate in that way, but it's more a function of saying, and it comes back to Jermaine's idea about mediocrity, and it comes back to Amanda's pushback against the mediocrity. I don't think Jermaine's saying mediocrity, and I don't think Amanda's responding to him saying mediocrity. It's a question of validity. We like what we are producing is valid. And so then it comes back to what Yolanda was saying about the difference between art and architecture. For me, the question wasn't about Blackness. Blackness is just always there for me, right? So whether it was in architecture or art, for instance, I have a whole lot of artwork that I've done that don't got anything to do with being Black. I got this whole Hi-Fi de Stijl series, right? Which is a blend of the Stijl style of, you know, collage making and the hi-fi stereo systems that I grew up with that my pops had in the 70s and 80s, right? And I have curators come to my crib, oh, that's dope, oh, I love it. But they not gonna ever pick it and show it because it ain't the Black thing, right? So like in that regard, I've accepted that particular thing. But for me, the difficulty was me coming from this architectural background, not going through the MFA program. And I know Amanda can speak to this too. And so being in these early art architecture shows, this sort of in-between space, you know, and you know, as like as far as BRC, I think like Amanda and I are sort of the two who are not like academics. We're not professors. We're not connected to the institution, but we sometimes teach, you know, lectures or courses. We sort of meander through the art world. And so the difficulty that I kind of was processing was like, is the architectural stuff that I'm doing valid as artwork, right? So that was what I had so that was where my skepticism lay. And my early artwork in the art world was very architectural, and it was like, is this art? I think it looks dope as shit, but art is such a weird gatekeeping world, you know what I mean? Where like, it's how you phrase what you're producing, it's how you place it within your contemporaries, you know what I mean? How you locate what you're doing within contemporary, you know?
But like, that's the same for architecture. You could say the exact same thing about architecture, you know, and I think like what you're saying about value, like that's the fundamental thing. Like in these disciplines, whether it's art or architecture, you know, what's valued, what's not valued. You know, that's the issue.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll just wrap it up. Long story short, exactly. It really comes down to being cool with what you're producing and reaching that point where you're like, you know what? This is my creative production. You know, and I'm just putting out, you know, and so for someone like me, like the things that almost elevated my own particular career.
What? To Lake. Lake is a savant. He's a genius. For him to say he doesn't work hard, he's not normal like the rest of us. He's a robot.
He just puts it together.
He doesn't have to work hard to make those beautiful, spectacular imaginaries. He doesn't think about it. He literally just makes it.
I'm just sitting here listening to him.
He's just making it all the time. So
Yeah.
because
right, because I was just about to say.
No, I'm just sitting here in awe myself because I know for a fact that Lake works at least 60 hours a week, at the very least, right? And if he sleeps more than an average of 6 hours a night, I'd be super surprised because he's just always doing stuff. And when he's not walking the streets of Brooklyn, gathering material for his next project.
I'm telling you, I believe in it. So it's about believing in it and believing it, producing it, production, El Producto, get it done.
The bottom line is
this is what I do.
The bottom line, Lake, is that you work twice as hard. You're twice as dope as anybody who is doing mediocre ass shit and getting by. That's what I'm talking about. Like, that's the level. Like, if you were working half as hard, you couldn't get into the same spaces that our white contemporaries are getting into, right? You would not be in this conversation if you were working half as hard.
But the value on what we are producing is the bottom line.
I'm going to push back and say, who cares about the spaces? You have to be doing the work because you want to do the work. So I'm gonna quote my second mother in Miami, Jamaican mother in Miami. She says, if you have a problem with me, tell somebody else. You gotta do the work. So when we made these decisions, when Yolanda made that decision, when I made the decision to leave the profession after 6.5 years, I expected complete invisibility. I didn't leave one profession to join another because I thought maybe it was a better road. So I was ready for the obscurity because I traded it for the happiness, right? The joy, the awe, the delight. I don't know which, I didn't have a word, right? I was just like, this is what I got to do. But that's also like immense privilege, right? And so
that was my same reason too.
That was a disappointment to all the work that both the architectural foremothers and fathers had put forth, but also our ancestors. If I'm sitting around doing something I don't really want to do, and I have privilege, absolutely unacceptable. It just is, right? So we cannot worry. And I think so much of the BRC is about trying to think through new institutions and stop going in the little hamster wheel about who didn't say what and why you don't like us and how come we didn't get the same thing and what. All that's valid, and we were on it with that too. But by the same token, you gotta be convicted in what you're doing, right? As Lake said, I believe. So you gotta believe. And I'm gonna give a last slight tangent, but I'm gonna give a shout out to the NAT Ministry. The NAT Ministry says, stop working so hard, Lake, take a nap. Just rest. You gotta rest. We got a lot ahead of us. So I'm gonna just toss that in there, a little tangent, a little caveat. All right, I'm gonna be quiet now.
I think this next question ties into Chizoba's question. And it's just, it was probably already answered a little bit, but I just wanted to know, how can we as architects and designers, as well as those seeking a career in the field, offer support and prepare the Black youth for the realities of architecture and design?
I mean, I don't think there's one uniform answer to that, but one of the coolest things that I find about Black people in the field of architecture is that they typically answer unsolicited emails. And if you're just somebody saying, I'm doing Black work, you don't know me from anybody, typically they'll answer you. Like that happened to me. Milton Curry at University of Michigan didn't know me from a doorknob, but I was working on my thesis, which was about Blackness, and he's somebody I knew of. So I just wrote him an email and said, hey, can you help me? And his response wasn't no. His response was, this is too long for an email. Here's my cell phone number. And so we had a 3-hour conversation about my thesis. And I would ask that you pay it forward in the same way that the people pay it forward for you. I mean, I always try my best to do the same thing, to where if my students need help, or if some other student from another school sends me an email or something, I try my best to answer them. Obviously, I'm not infallible, right? Like I might let something slip through the crack, but I think that's just the simplest thing, is just to do the work with rigor, like as Amanda mentioned.
Great, thank you.
For me, I'm just really grateful to be technically in the same space as all of you. Excuse me. And my question originally was, what space can white folks make for us Black folks? Excuse me, but you pretty much answered it already. Just we make our own space, and if they don't like it, who cares? And that's kind of been the way that I've been excuse me, moving through graduate school and then undergrad. And it's just that I'm here, I exist. If you don't like it, okay, not my problem. And I'm so grateful to hear you guys have this conversation, for me to be personally a part of it, because it's giving me a little bit of a push to finish my thesis. And it's kind of like, I can do this. I'm about to graduate in like less than a month. And I'm really grateful. So thank you all so much.
And what you're doing after graduation, you're being interviewed.
I have
interviews right now, right?
I have a job. I'm going to be working at GTM Architects in Maryland. Yeah. So.
Great, congratulations.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I think it's pretty clear. I think you know this for certain, that white folks aren't going to make space for us, right? Because all of the spaces that they have made for us are the leftovers. It's the throwaway spaces. This is what the spaces that nobody wants, or when our spaces become valuable, then they take it over again. This is a convenient place to put a football stadium, or this is a complete convenient space to put all of our civic buildings. We're going to clear these slums and put our civic center here, or this is a convenient place to run a highway through, right? So any space that has been given to us is not a space that we really want to be by choice. So we have to create our own spaces. We have to take the spaces that have been given and transform them into new spaces, and then go back and claim other spaces. Craig Wilkins has a great piece in for Roughneck Constructivism, for part of the show that Kara Walker did at University of Pennsylvania back in 2014, I think. And he's talking about, how we get from just kind of existing in space to we'll just steal space, right? Like we're just gonna steal space and take it over, instead of just existing within that space. And in reality, we're not actually stealing that space. That space has always been ours. We just need to claim it.
Yeah, I mean, I will say one thing though, obviously the work that I did for the exhibition is about the Black quotidian. And I think, I obviously really agree with all of these thoughts about valuing all of our spaces, but no matter what space we're in, we're also trying to take off from the free throw line. We're still trying to do the 360 dunk. So like, don't get it twisted. It's not, we're still trying to deliver the highest quality of work. So, and this last month that you have, you just need to make sure you hit that free throw or that fade away, or take off from the free throw line. So, yeah.
Just remember, it's your space. It's your space. So as long as it's your space, they have no idea where you're going, right? Once you let them dictate that space, they know where you're going and they're gonna be waiting on you. So the thing that, once it's your space, you can go anywhere with it. And it's sometimes it's gonna seem really, really tough, but it's your space. And that's one of the things that I value with my colleagues here, is that they've understood that. And we sometimes are in the same space, but we're sometimes forging different spaces, but we always kind of see each other in the space, but we have our own space. And that's the thing I think that frustrates a lot of people who can't see where we're going in that space.
I want to add just really quickly a little bit of a pivot, but just say, kind of returning a little bit back to the discussion I brought up earlier about privilege. I think what's absent in the conversation so far also is that we have the privilege, I'll keep using the word privilege, maybe even luxury, to have a show of divergent points of view and divergent kind of aesthetic and conceptual underpinnings because of the work of all the people that should have been in MoMA in the last 60 years. And so I just want to honor, because it's foregrounded for me, because we're at USC right now, and the legacy of Paul Williams being cemented by what Milton has done. This doesn't mean now that there shouldn't be the Paul Williams show. So you're going to rock it in LA, but MoMA needs one too. And Max Bond, and Michelle is killing it at the African American Museum, but we need it everywhere. So we also are the generation that demands that we're not going to have one and done. You're not going to be excited because we had the one show, and so we can't do. We had that show. No, we can have 15 shows just like this, and the surveys and the retrospectives, and all of that is still valid. So this isn't an either or. This is a both and, right? And so I think that that's really critical, that we also don't allow the narrative to continue that Thelma can have the groundbreaking show and then it's another 25 years, or, Paul Williams was in MoMA, but none of us knew that before this, or we cannot continue to have those kinds of perpetuations of narratives of singularity that also falls in that kind of magical realm, right? Like this has to be regular, where we're not even talking about it anymore, right? And so I just wanted to bring that into the conversation before we had to wrap it up, because I think it's really important. And a little bit of the reaction of even from my own family is well, did they do the show about the other guy that did the thing? It's well, no, that's not this show, but that's in the works somewhere. It's important that we just keep that as part of the discourse and the dialogue, that this isn't an either or.
Yeah, it's not time to celebrate. It's time to get to work. It's time to get to work.
Yes.
Okay. So it might be a good time to open for questions to the public.
There weren't many questions in there. Can I ask a question?
All right. Yeah.
There were a couple.
Now,
there's
anyone can ask
comments.
questions.
There's more comments than questions.
There was one about. Sorry. All right. Go ahead, G. But there was one about. There's one about benchmarks.
Yeah.
Drew Kessner asking about what kinds of benchmarks could be pointed to that would indicate progress. And I couldn't help but look at that and think about yesterday, right? Think about the verdict and all of the false start quotes that came out, and us looking at each other and shaking our heads like that ain't it, right? That's not what should be said at this moment. And the idea that there's going to be one benchmark moment where we finally turned the corner and we're post-racial. Racism is solved. Police brutality has ended. You know, and I was linking that to the day that Obama got elected. Obviously, it's not on the same level, but we felt like we're in a post-racial moment at that point. And I remember, you know, the gathering in Chicago and Oprah being there. And it's like, oh my God, we love Oprah, we love Obama, everybody loves Blackness. And you know, that's just not real. So we don't know. And there were some interesting answers there to that question, but the reality is that we just don't know when we got to that point, right? We don't know when we're really crossed the line. Yeah, I don't know what those benchmarks really are. I think we have goals that we're shooting for, goals for inclusion, not inclusion because we hate that word. Goals for representation, right? So that the student body and the faculty and the leadership actually looks like the demographics of the United States. That would be a kind of nice goal to achieve, but we're not really, we can't really tell when we're there, right? Because even when I heard the verdict, I was kind of moved to sing Sam Cooke, you know, thinking about change gonna come, right? Change gonna come. Like, we're not really there yet, but change is gonna come at some point. Go ahead, Jermaine. You had another question.
Oh man, I just wanted to talk to the students about those amazing ass videos they made. I mean, those things were like absolutely spectacular. So I just wanted to hear the inspiration behind the musical score. If Yolanda helped you all with the direction of those, or gave you all a prompt, or like how did that come to be? Was the goal just to show us up?
Oh, it was kind of just from discussions about like when we first came together about being moderators, and she was telling us about how the like program had gone to other schools, and we were just thinking how we could like contribute without just being like the Black students, and actually just like showing who we are, how we've gotten here, like our stories and what we have to offer in a more like compelling way. So we each kind of like thought about our different, I'll let everyone talk, but I'll just say we each kind of just thought about how to like coordinate our own portions, and then going through thinking about how to like start it off, was thinking about like starting off with like Tina Knowles, and like her, just like Solange inspires me a lot. So thinking of that like idea of us all being proud as Black people and like Black everything. So like that's how like you saw all those like narratives about Blackness, and yeah.
Yeah, and I think also the concept of isolation came up a lot. So with the collages and having it be on that white background, it really just kind of manifested this idea of being a Black member of society who's isolated from a community in some way or another. And that played a big part in mine specifically, I think, just because I did always feel a little bit isolated from many communities when I was younger. And like, I chose Brown Skin Girl by Beyonce as my background song. And I love that song. Every time I hear it, I tear up a little bit just because it's so inspirational, and it does just make me feel great as a brown skinned girl in the society. So, yeah.
Yeah, and as for me, I just wanted to be able to tell my story in a spatial way. As I experienced life, and then I got into architecture by coincidence, I reflected back and realized that I've been to and lived in places that actually have great architectural significance. And to kind of piece that together in a collage, I thought would be really compelling. So that's how I put mine together.
Yard man, true yard man.
For me, I think it was really important to note that like I'm like a conglomeration of things, and I'm still finding pieces of myself. Hence why I had the puzzle, and there are missing pieces because there's still time for me to learn and discover new things. And then in terms of my song, like Alicia Keys, You Don't Know My Name, I think that really just like resonated with me because like I'm still a young member of society, I'm still a young Black body, but I'm still making a space and a name for myself. And although that isn't really the idea of the song, I think like that statement really stuck to me. So yeah.
Personally, it was actually really difficult for me to figure out what to present because I'm made up of so many different things. And I spoke to my dad on the phone so many times this week, just trying to figure out what to do. And he directed me towards the Kim Hill short documentary from when she was in the Black Eyed Peas back in the 90s. And just watching her talk about who she is and why she stopped being a part of this specific group because she wasn't going to compromise who she was made me think, okay, well, in that case, I'm Bettina Roberta Amani Brown, and there's no way I'm going to compromise who I am for anyone or anything. So that's why I put all those pictures together, and I was picking a portion of myself out in color, saying like I stand out from all these different backgrounds, but I'm also still very much an American. I'm first generation Liberian American, and I love being Black so much. There is no one like us.
Yeah, and I think with my video in particular, like I chose to speak Igbo because it's a language that is my first language, even though I sound like I'm born here and everything I am, but like that's the language I speak at home. That's the language I grew up in, and I didn't learn it like in a traditional setting like they teach us in the Western world. I learned it by hearing it and speaking back. So I can speak conversationally, but I realized through doing this that like the language is being lost because it's not being written, and just trying to read and understand it was challenging. So, and just showing my like family's personal journey and how we gone from place to place, but it's not really like the structure that brings us all together per se. It's the memories that we can share in them. And yeah.
I'm not even your professor, and I'm proud of you all. Like that was. I don't know what's in the water out there that Milton and Yolanda are giving to you all, but I think the profession is in really great hands, just based off of the little snippets that you all just gave us that couple seconds ago.
Thank you.
There's a question in the chat that says, it's always magic when kindred spirits come together, but more especially in a project like this. What new territories, common ground, areas of knowledge have you discovered by working on this exhibition together?
Well, to a certain extent, I think, so we each worked with a city, not necessarily a city that we knew about. Some knew more or were more familiar with the city than others, but it seems to me that like even aside from that, that for every person, there were things that we discovered just in doing our projects, like that the projects themselves were acts of discovery. Even though there were parts, you know, that we were doing that we already knew how to do, there were, I don't know, my impression of the work is that, you know, it was all taking risks and that there were new things that were being discovered in each project.
And that we never saw the work until it went up as well. So I haven't gone to the show yet, so I haven't learned yet to a certain degree, but I think that's, for me, the beautiful part of it was the symphony and trusting that the symphony would come together. And I'm just very impressed that everything came out Black. And we never talked about it. Everything, with the exception of Leak. There's some black in there though, Leek, right?
Lakes is all green.
Well, mine is actually all white.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of black ink, but.
I thought
Yeah, I
someone
mean,
was going to say that the BRC came out of this.
Oh, that's right.
I thought this was the alley-oop and nobody said.
I thought you were going to answer the question after you asked it, Amanda.
Right, the dude, right? That's it, right? That's the one of the biggest things come out of. We kind of have shifted the paradigm also, that the expectation is that exhibition making can't be generative beyond itself or speculating. So for me, that's, I keep saying it, obviously I'm a broken record, but that's one of the most exciting parts for me, is that, you know, we've done something that lives beyond even the archive of the exhibition.
I was thinking about the phrasing of the question about us working on the exhibition together, and there's a lot of it that wasn't working together, right? Like, you know, there's this counter narrative that the show is a BRC show, but the BRC was a product of the show. The BRC didn't create the show. It's not, so it's the kind of other way around. And we worked together collectively on the BRC. We worked separately on the exhibition. So we didn't know what each other were doing. We didn't see the work together. And even last semester, we were talking about these videos that we're creating. And we had these really beautiful moments every time we'd see the videos, because we didn't know what videos everybody else was working on. So it was like a show for us too. And that was one of these beautiful things where we started to see these overlaps and intersections with all of the videos and all of the work that was in the videos and these themes that we started to extract from the videos. And I started to see that in the videos today from the students. Like, there's this, you know, about identity and history, and again, moving the transposition of people, of Black people, from one place to another, and standing out amongst a crowd. That's all really, really powerful. And I was thinking, you know, from a traditional sense, people looking at this, asking themselves, how is this about architecture? Like, I thought I was going to an architecture lecture. Why am I seeing pictures of people and food and countrysides and all this stuff? Where's the architecture in it? And I was thinking, you know, anybody who thinks like that just doesn't get it. Like, this is what architecture is and what it's supposed to be. This is what happens with architecture when you put it in the hands of young Black people. They start to see themselves in it. Instead of thinking about lines and forms and shapes, they're thinking about their identity and their culture and how that gets reflected in their work, right? And that's the kind of powerful stuff that comes out of this collaboration.
But I mean, I think there's also something really structural, and to me, this goes back to what Mabel and Sean were able to pull off, which is really the overlap of architecture and Black study. And I think when you're presenting a work to Christina Sharp, you draw differently, you know, and you talk differently. So I think from the first email we got with the list of those readings, to me, it was just a different conversation. So, like, to a certain extent, it's really about how much architectural discourse is willing to engage with Black study. And I know, you know, Mabel's already doing this work and Mario's already doing this work. But I just feel like that's the liftoff moment. That's the MJ from the free throw line moment. And I think we're ready for that.
Well, I think that's a great visual metaphor and reality to kind of conclude this portion. I want to thank the students and echo the comments. Amazing, amazing work. What we talk about at USC Architecture is architecture school is not like baggage claim. You don't leave your identity at the door and come in and assimilate to something that already exists. You bring everything with you. And so I think you've seen a tremendous subset of examples of how our students do that. And I'm really proud of that. And I think what all of you have shown this evening and the work and your careers and what you're doing in the institutions and inside and outside of institutions that you're all affiliated with is a refreshing authenticity and a reclaiming of the space of imagination for subjectivities that you yourselves are, and also who you stand in for. There's been a lot of talk about the overlapping of generations and generational integrity and ethics, and so I think that those are all, for me, formulations that are coexisting and very rich, and I think very unique to the kind of imagination that comes from experience, that comes from reading your own legacy, interpreting that legacy, and also beginning to project your own future and owning your future. So thank you for that. We're going to continue to see all of you, the students included, working in and showing your work, and I'm just very excited for this moment for all of you and for all of us. So thank you. I think anybody who's registered can join us at the after party. So thanks again, and really appreciate you closing out our public event series that couldn't have happened in a classier and more robust way. So thank you. Have a good evening, and we'll see everybody at the after party. Please join us. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, students.
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
Mabel.
Thanks, students.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.